August, I got a call from your pastor, Christopher, said, I understand you'll be filling in for me this Sunday. I said yes, and we made arrangements to get together for coffee and talk about things. But he asked me if I was planning on using the lectionary readings for this Sunday. As I'm sure you're aware, the first couple of months he did use the lectionary, but he's more of a series pastor, preacher. But I jokingly said, well, it's kind of hard to do a series in one Sunday. Didn't figure you wanted to be here all day. But in a rather strange or unique way, it really is a series, because although you might not have heard it, last week I filled in at Amity Church up the road there, and the sermon was on, when do we have enough? Last week we were focusing on when is enough money, when is enough stuff, right? Just a little bit more might be enough, or just a little bit more. It's always just a little bit more. Today, again, the question is, do we have enough? But rather than looking at money or possessions, we're talking about faith. Do we have enough faith? The disciples didn't seem to think so. They asked Jesus for more in that text. In one of his books, Chuck Swindoll tells about a lady who desperately wanted to go tour Israel. But she was waiting for God to give her a sign that that's what she was supposed to do, that, he would be with her, and he really wanted her to do that. So the day she was beginning to make plans for her trip, she woke up at exactly 7:47. And she said, wow, when we go to Israel, we're going to fly on a 747. There's God's sign. I'm supposed to do this. Another young man wanted to buy a car, but he wanted to know that whatever car he bought was God's will, that God was in it, and that's what he wanted him to do. And then one night he had a dream, and in his dream, everything he saw was yellow. So when he got up, he hurried down to a car dealer, and he bought the yellowest car he could find. And of course, it was a lemon. Now, some of you might know, or maybe not, that in the United Methodist Church, deacon is an ordained clergy position. Probably had a deacon serve here before. But in many of the other churches, Baptist, Presbyterian, a deacon is a lay position. It's a position of leadership in the church, but it's not clergy. Anyway, one Baptist deacon decided that he wanted to be a pastor. But he really didn't want to go to seminary and spend money and spend all that time learning. And he wondered if God would approve of him going online and getting one of those degrees without doing the work, and maybe getting an online ordination that said he was a preacher. He concluded this was certainly God's will for him after he read 1 Timothy 3:13 from the King James Version. Might read a little differently in yours. But it said, "For they that have used the office of a deacon well purchase to themselves a good degree." There's your sign, right? These well-meaning people looking for a sign remind me of the disciples that day in our text from Luke. I mean, it hadn't been that long ago that Jesus gave them power and authority to heal and to drive out demons. And they went out 2 by 2, and they did that, and they came back and said, wow, even the demons bowed down to us. You'd think that they had enough faith, right? I mean, they've been with Jesus every day. They've seen miracles that would make our hearts stand still if we saw them. But they wanted more faith. And what more could Jesus possibly give them? I think the answer is nothing. And that's kind of what he gave them. Nothing. But notice how he answers their request. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed. Maybe some of you are familiar with mustard seeds. I had to look up a picture of them a few years ago preaching on this text. And they're pretty tiny. Right? He said, but a great big bush or tree grows out of them. But I think he's saying to them, your problem isn't you lack faith or your faith is too small. What you lack is determination and persistence and the will to see it through. You just want to take the easy way out. It doesn't take a great deal of faith to do miraculous things, as they've already proven. What it takes is commitment, determination, will to see it through to the end. There are some of you who are Ohio State football fans. You might remember, I don't, a little before my time, but back in the 40s, Bucky Wirtz was a walk-on linebacker at Ohio State. Bucky was only 5'6". When he showed up for the first practice, the coach at the time, Wes Fessler, was shocked. He said, "Bucky, you're too small to play linebacker. You're going to get killed. Go home. Forget this." With a firm, committed voice, Bucky said, "Coach, with all due respect, not you or anyone else can keep me from playing football for my school." Well, as it turned out, Bucky was the best tackler on the squad. 3 straight years he led Ohio State in tackles. 1950 Rose Bowl, they played USC. They had the All-American running back, 250 pounds of power, regarded as the best running back in the country. But it seemed like every time he got the ball, Bucky was in the backfield tackling him for a loss. And Ohio State won that game in a big upset. He was small, maybe didn't have the ability of some of the athletes, but what he had was the heart, the determination, and the will to be a champion. The problem, Jesus was saying, is not that you have too little faith. You're just not applying it. You're not trying. You're not using the faith that you have. Then he tells them that strange little parable, that we just kind of shake our head at and say, what is he saying here? Suppose one of you has a servant who's been plowing or looking after the sheep, and when that servant comes in from work, would you say, "Well, sit down and eat and drink"? No. You'd tell him, "Get busy, fix my meal, serve me, and you can eat later." Do you think the master would thank the servant for doing their job? And then Jesus adds these interesting words. "So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, 'We are but unworthy servants. We've only done our duty.'" Jesus lived in a world in which slavery was a fact. And we don't like it, we might not understand it, but that's the way it was in that day. And he had to deal with it. But I don't think most of us would do too well in that culture. Most of us aren't in that upper 2% or whatever they say it is these days, so many of us would be a servant. We wouldn't get along very well. I mean, we like to be appreciated for our work. Give me a pat on the back. We want a participation trophy just for showing up. Maybe today's golf outing will have participation trophies. But, we don't want to be a faceless servant. We don't want to blend into the woodwork. Years ago, Anthony Hopkins, the actor, spent some time with a butler, a professional butler, preparing for a role in a movie he was going to make. And the butler said he measured his success by how well he could do and be of service without drawing attention to himself. He said the real test of a butler is the room seems emptier when he's in it. You don't notice them. They're just there. And that's a concept that is alien to many of us. We don't want to blend in. We want people to recognize us and say, "Wow, what a good job you did. Well done." Maybe give us some extravagant praise or maybe a raise in pay, some kind of bonus, right? Don't we deserve something like that? A few years ago, there was an article in a magazine about the challenge that many companies are facing today, giving their younger workers constant positive reinforcement. Because that's what they've gotten their whole lives, from their parents, from their schools, everywhere. From the day they were born, they've heard, "You're the greatest. You can do anything. There's never been anyone like you before." And that part's true. Never will be again for any of us. But you're the greatest? What happened to a little humility? Thursday night. Some of you might have watched the Bengals beat the Dolphins. I saw on Friday that Tyreek Hill, a wide receiver for Miami, was upset because during the game one of the Cincinnati coaches said something that disrespected him. Now, he's a famous trash talker, but he was disrespected by what somebody said. Seriously? Is that what we've come to? Get over yourself. Welcome to the real world. Get a real job and find out what disrespect is, right? But it's getting hard for people in our society to imagine doing anything simply and solely because that's their duty. Put Jesus' words in a more contemporary setting, we might imagine paying AEP, paying our electric bill for the month. When we send that small fortune off to pay for our utilities, we don't expect a letter back from the president of AEP saying, "Well done. You paid on time. Keep up the good work. We're so proud of you." It'd be nice, but no. We pay our electric bill because it's our responsibility and because we want to keep the lights on, the air conditioning or the heat or whatever. So also, says Jesus, when we serve God, we're only doing our duty. It's not anything special. And so we don't deserve special reward. We don't need special spiritual insights. We don't even need a mountain's worth of faith. All we need is a little bit. All we need is Jesus. All we need to do is show up and be willing to do our part, whatever part that might be. You know, we're all gifted and called in different ways, but if we don't do our part, something's missing. Kind of the theme for World Communion Sunday, we come together with what unites us, not what separates us. Pastor Doug Meyer talks about a telephone call he received from a teenager. She called to tell him that she wanted to do something to help people. But, she said, I can only help on Saturday between 2 and 5 because I'm in sports and I have a busy social life and I have to study and yada, 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 yada. But she really wanted to help, but she wasn't going to do anything outside where there might be bugs or snakes or spiders or anything like that. But her mother said to be sure that she was helping with people because that looked good on her college resume. She liked the idea of working with the hungry, but she really didn't want to cook, and she absolutely was not going to do dishes. But helping people was something she really wanted to do. Isn't that how so many people want to serve today? When it's convenient for them, when it fits within their area of expertise, when they get recognition and appreciation. The disciples thought their problem was they lacked faith. Jesus said, no, that's not the problem. The problem is a lack of commitment. And so often that's our problem too, isn't it? We're too affluent, too pampered, too comfortable. We hear the words from the gospel and we just cringe. Do I really have to do that? Is that really what he meant? Yeah, I think it is. Love one another as I have loved you. Not easy, but that's a charge for all of us. A Catholic woman was dying of cancer. She went to a priest and she said, Father, I figured out the meaning of life. Oh, great. Really? What is it? She said, well, when you're a child and a teenager, you serve. When you're in your 20s, beginning life, starting a family, you serve. When you're in your 30s and 40s, when you're middle age, when you're in your 60s and 70s, you just keep serving, even after you retire. And you move into your 80s and you start to slow down, but you keep serving. You get sick, you serve. You're dying, you serve. On your last day, what you do is serve. Now, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. You can take your last day off. Tell him Pastor Dale said it was okay. Serve. That's what we're called to do. in some way every day, without fuss, without a lot of recognition or glory. You'll get that after that last day when we pass over to the other side, and hopefully you can hear Jesus say those ultimate words of respect and commendation. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Come, share my joy. It's who we are. We're followers of Christ. We're servants. We serve because there was one who first served us. We're not trying to work our way into heaven. It's not going to happen. That's already taken care of by what Christ did on the cross for us. But our salvation came about because once long ago, the God of all creation came to earth and took upon himself, what? The role of a servant. Not a king, not a prince, but a servant. And so now God calls all his people to serve, not because it's going to look good on our resume, not because we're going to get praised for it, but because that's who we are. Followers of the man who became a servant of all, that we might be called sons and daughters of the Most High God. Pastor Dan Baumgartner tells about a group of men at a church in Minnesota who understand what a servant mentality is. These men have made it a mission to take care of Bob. Bob's a man in our church who has degenerative arthritis, been in a wheelchair for years. And every morning, someone from the men's group goes to Bob's house, makes him lunch, pushes him around the neighborhood in his wheelchair for a walk, keeps him updated on what's going on at church. Every morning, one of his Christian brothers arrives at the front door ready to spend time with him. They've been doing that for 10 years. Now, that was a couple of years ago, and I'm sure they still are. Every morning, someone went. They didn't have special skills. They didn't have magic words to say. They simply went and served and spent some time with him. Hopefully that makes sense to you. You know, you're probably not called to do that every day, but maybe every once in a while you could do something. We have a crisis of commitment, I think, in our society. We have a lack of people willing to be servants. We all, at least so many of us, want to look out for number one. It's all about us, we think. And yet, we know it's not. It's all about Christ. That all about me attitude has taken so much out of our culture and our society, and sometimes even in the church. You know, there's always something needs done in the church. A job that offers little opportunity for advancement or recognition or praise. Just takes a little bit of hard work. Maybe toiling in relative obscurity, sometimes without even sensing success. Washing dishes after a meal, community meal, or a funeral get-together or something. Teaching a junior high Sunday school. Now there's a challenge. If you never tried it, I highly recommend it. Probably not, but somebody has to do it. And somebody's gifted in that way. And if they don't do it, it doesn't get done, and then what happens? Sing in the choir. Serve on the finance committee. But all too often we say, oh, sorry, Pastor, I'm too busy. I don't have time for that. Or I don't have the skills for that. And yet we know deep down that if we just commit to it, God will provide what we need. We just have to be willing and able to do it. The disciple said, give us more faith, and there's no record in there that Jesus did. I mean, he didn't wave a magic wand and say, poof, you have more faith. They didn't need more faith. They simply needed to show up. He would give them what they needed. But first, they needed to show up. They needed to be ready and willing, and able. They needed to say, like Isaiah the prophet, "Here am I, send me." I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what you're calling me to. But I'm available. And I will go where you lead. You may be familiar with John Wesley's 3 simple rules. Do no harm, do good, stay in love with God. Stay in love with God. Oh, that's easy. Love you, God. Study Scripture, pray, spend time with God. But one of the keys to staying in love with God is to gather for worship, communal worship, and especially in taking the sacrament of Holy Communion. He called communion a means of grace, a means by which God extends grace to us. And so as we remember and honor the sacrifice that Christ made for us, we take him unto ourselves. And in that way, we are refreshed, renewed, made whole. This morning, we celebrate World Communion Sunday. We celebrate it with Christians around the world. It's a time when we invite God to forgive us once again. Forgive for what I did yesterday. Forgive me for what I'm sure I'll do tomorrow. Try as I might. But forgive me and then fill me with the power of the Spirit to go forth, to be your hands, your feet, your very heart in a hurting and dark world. We come to the table hungry, thirsty, broken in so many ways, but we will depart filled with the very righteousness of God. This morning, may you once again feel God's power in your life. May you feel God's call upon your life to serve in some small way. You don't need a great deal of